Imagination is a powerful tool. It makes us laugh, sing, and can sometimes swell up feelings of bravery. Imagination's legacy leaves its mark throughout our lives and takes us back to the simpler days, the days of our childhood. One of imagination's most dominant forms is animation. Animation brings imagination to life and gives it the power to share its legacy with others. Walt Disney was a leader in animation. He faced many obstacles on his path to becoming the world's most renowned animator of all time, but he overcame them and built his empire. In his life, Walt would receive 26 Academy Awards, would create one of the most renowned faces in animation, and would build the first theme park. Walt Disney was a leader in animation and imagination. His legacy has continued to live on past his death. Walter Elias Disney was born on December 5, 1901 in Hermosa, Illinois to Elias and Flora Call Disney. He had a great talent for drawing at a young age, and it would develop later in life. 10 years after Walt's birth, Walt began attending school at McKinley High School and would attend courses at the Chicago Academy of Fine Arts. Walt became very active in his new school by joining the school newspaper and taking on the job of school cartoonist. On April 6, 1917, the United States entered World War I, and Walt was ready to help. He was denied military service due to his age, but did not stop. He would eventually join the Red Cross, driving trucks in France. After his time in France, Walt returned home and moved to Kansas City, Missouri in hopes of finding work in commercial art. Walt had trouble finding work in Kansas City, so he decided to go into business for himself. He hired Ub Irks, Hugh Harman, Rudolph Ising, and Fred Harman, and with them formed an animating company called Laugh-O-Grams. Soon after the founding of the company, Laugh-O-Grams was contracted to produce 12 cartoons. In addition to these films, Walt began working on the Alice comedies. The Alice comedies were a good idea, but Walt ran out of money during production. Most men might have given up at this point, tired by all the failures and difficulties they had acquired, but not Walt Disney. Walt was persistent. In order to further his career, he would sell his camera and purchase a one-way ticket to Hollywood in the summer of 1923. 2 months after Walt's arrival in Hollywood, he contacted his brother Roy, and together they pooled their money and formed the Disney Brothers Studio. In 1925, Walt took on an employee by the name of Lillian Bounds. The two of them got to know each other, and a couple months later, on July 25, 1925, they were wed. Walt and Lillian would have 2 daughters, Diane and Sharon. When Walt left Kansas City, he took an unfinished reel of the Alice comedies with him, and after founding his studio, he went to work on it. On March 1, 1924, the first episode of the Alice comedies, Alice's Day at Sea, premiered. The Alice comedies had decent income, totaling around $1,500, but the series ended years later in 1927 due to falling popularity. With the Alice comedies a lost cause, Walt had to come up with the next big thing for his studio. In 1926, producer Charles Mintz contracted Disney Brothers Studio to produce a new cartoon. The result was Oswald the Lucky Rabbit, and he was an instant success. Praised for being cartoon ingenuity, Oswald swept the nation with extremely high merchandise performance. 2 years later, in 1928, a deal fell through, trying to get higher pay for producing Oswald. The result was the loss of the right to Oswald and the deal to produce him. With the loss of his studio's main breadwinner, Walt had to come up with something new for his company, and fast. It had to be just as big as Oswald. Walt's inspiration for the new character would come from a pet mouse he kept at Laugh-O-Grams' studio. He would call him Mickey Mouse. Mickey Mouse was designed by Irks, but Walt gave Mickey his personality. Mickey's first appearance would be in the cartoon Plain Crazy. Mickey Mouse is a cornerstone to Walt Disney's legacy. Mickey would not only save Walt and his company, but put them back on top again. Walt even received a special award for creating Mickey Mouse. The creation of Oswald and Mickey were just the beginning in Disney's innovation. On July 29, 1928, Walt would be the first animator to successfully synchronize sound and animation with his creation of Steamboat Willie. 4 years later, Walt would be the first to use an innovating new concept in animation, full-color 3-strip Technicolor. Walt would show off this new concept in his animated film Flowers and Trees. Flowers and Trees would go on to win Walt his first of many Academy Awards in animated short subjects. In 1934, Walt Disney began planning his first full-length animated film, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Snow White used a multi-plane camera that allowed for depth movies had not seen at the time, and the camera would be used in later Walt Disney productions. Snow White was dubbed Disney's Folly due to the immense cost it cost to produce it, and during production, Walt was forced to find investors to back him due to insufficient funds. Snow White was the first full-length animated movie to be produced in Technicolor, and when it came out in February of 1938, it earned $8 million in its initial release. When World War II came around in 1941 for the United States, the whole country was helping out. Even Disney Studios did their part by producing propaganda films for American citizens. This film shows the education of a Nazi.
Now let's see what happens to one of Hitler's children. Kindergarten, and little Hans learns the fairy tales of the new order. Remember the story of the Sleeping Beauty? Hans was taught that the Wicked Witch was democracy. And Sleeping Beauty, who can she be? The beautiful princess is Germany. And the brave, handsome knight, you know who he is.
Heil Hitler!
Heil Hitler! Heil! Heil Spiraka! Heil Spiraka!
Moral of this Nazi fairy tale seems to be that Hitler got Germany on her feet, climbed into the saddle, and took her for a ride.
In the late 1940s, on a business trip to Chicago, Walt started drawing sketches on an amusement park. These sketches would later become Disneyland, and after Walt's death, the park would become a monument to the man and his legacy. On July 17, 1955, Disneyland hosted a live TV preview with thousands of people in attendance. Even future President Ronald Reagan was there. After Walt's death, many more parks would open up around the world. Today, 17.2 million people visit Disney World alone every year. Most likely one of the greatest innovations by the leader in imagination was his development of an optical printer as seen in the film Mary Poppins. The optical printer allowed for animation and live action to coexist like never before. Disneyland and the optical printer would be some of the last big hurrahs for Walt Disney, because on November 2nd, 1966, while having some x-rays done, doctors discovered a huge tumor had spread throughout Mr. Disney's lungs. 28 days later, on November 30th, Walt collapsed at his home and was rushed to Providence St. Joseph Medical Center, where he stayed till his death on November 15, 1966. He was 65 years old. After his death, the Walt Disney Company would continue making films and expanding. Today, the company is worth $74.9 billion. With theme parks, stocks, movies, and TV shows, Disney is also arguably the world's most successful diversified media conglomerate. Walt Disney Company would even buy Pixar in 2006 for $7.4 billion and Lucasfilm in 2012 for $4.05 billion. Walt Disney was a leader in animation. His innovations in synchronizing sound and animation, his insight in using tricolor Technicolor, and his ingenuity in developing an advanced multi-plane camera and an optical printer will never be forgotten. Walt Disney's legacy is still making a profound impact today. The legacy of Walt Disney is that of a man who had great ideas and never gave up. He created masterpieces like Snow White, Mary Poppins, and Fantasia. Today, Walt Disney's legacy reminds us of our own childhoods. With numerous films and TV shows, most children learn about Walt Disney's works like Mickey Mouse before they learn how to tie their shoes. Walt Disney's leadership is an inspiration to us all, and his legacy is the legacy of imagination.